loved my wife more than anything else. My love for her has not changed since the moment I first saw her. I was always ready to do anything for her, and that feeling never changed over the years. We first met at university, where we were both studying acting. On the first day of class, our eyes met for the first time. She had honey-colored eyes that matched her wavy brown hair. The spark between us was clear from the start, and when we were chosen to work together, we knew it was fate. "My name is Sarah," she said as soon as I approached her after class. I took her hand and kissed it. "Andrew," I replied. She then took one of my hair strands and wrapped it around her finger, looking into my eyes and biting her lip. It was an amazing start, followed by an even more amazing end that night. The next night, we went on our first date to watch a theater show. We held each other's hands throughout the performance, and afterward, I walked her to her university dorm. Every day after that was like a love story. We went through ups and downs, broke up and got back together. However, one thing never changed for me: my love for her and my readiness to do anything for her. We got married after graduation and became successful in the theater acting scene, always performing romantic roles together. It was easy to transfer the deep love we felt for each other onto the stage. One day, our lives took a drastic turn when we were approached by a member of the audience after a successful show. "Wonderful performance," he said in a strange English accent. "Thank you. You're kind," said Sarah, squeezing my hand. I could feel her discomfort from this man, but being a talented actress, she managed to put on a nice front. "I've been following you two for a long time," he continued, his pale blue eyes staring into Sarah. "I'm a big fan of your work. Every performance is captivating, and I can tell you put real passion into your exchanges. You two must truly love each other." "Yes," I said, stepping slightly in front of Sarah. "We love each other very much. I'm willing to do anything for her." I looked at her. She gave me that beautiful smile of hers. "That warms my heart to hear," he said, placing his hands behind his back and looking up into the night sky. "True love is a precious gift that is often taken for granted. If you're not careful, you can easily lose it forever, and it can never be replaced, no matter how hard you try." He then looked at me, and I could see just how unsettling his pale blue eyes were. "Hold on to that gift. Cherish it forever." He started to walk away before I asked the question that had been bothering me since we met. "Who are you?" I shouted. He stopped and turned his head. "Your biggest fan," he answered. He then walked away. Sarah and I looked at each other, puzzled by what had just happened. Later that night, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie when suddenly there was a knock on the door. "I wonder who that could be," said Sarah as she got up to see who it was. She looked through the peephole and froze in place before taking a step back and opening the door. Standing just outside was the same man we had spoken to earlier that night. He stood there with his hands behind him, his pale blue eyes shining like the moon. "Darling," I said, standing up from the couch to join Sarah at the door. "Please, come in," Sarah said to the man. To my shock, "What are you doing?" I yelled, running to get to the door. The man stepped inside before I got there and began to stroke her face. When I finally got to them, I threw my fist and connected with his face, knocking him back outside. I quickly slammed the door and locked it. I turned to Sarah, who was in some sort of trance. I tried to snap her out of it. "Sarah!" I yelled, shaking her. "Sarah! Wake up!" There was nothing I could do to get her to respond. I shook her, slapped her, and even splashed water in her face. Nothing worked. Suddenly, the lights in the house went out. I looked around until I saw the silhouette of a man standing outside our living room window. I blinked, and he was gone. I began to panic and ran to the gun safe in our bedroom. Despite being theater enthusiasts, we were well trained in self-defense and firearms. We could each hold our own if our lives were in danger. And if there was ever a time to put that training to use, it was now. When I returned to the living room, I immediately raised my weapon. There stood the strange man, holding Sarah by the face. "Let her go! You bastard!" I yelled, aiming for his head. He looked at me, and the only thing I could see in the darkness were his glowing red eyes. He then turned his head to Sarah, and I fired, hitting him directly in the head. He fell to the floor hard, and I ran over. Sarah fell over too, but I caught her before she hit the ground. She still would not respond, her eyes wide open in a trance. I looked over to the man, but he was gone. I gently laid her on the floor and stood up quickly, readying my weapon once again. Suddenly, I felt a strong, tight grip on the back of my neck and was then thrown across the room. Hitting the wall, I groaned in pain as I grabbed my gun and slowly stood to my feet, shaking as I raised my weapon again. Again, he had a hold of Sarah, but this time he pulled her head close to his. I felt my heart race and my blood boil as he put her lips to his glowing red eyes staring right at me. "No!" I screamed as I ran towards them. He then pushed her to the side and opened his arms to me, as if inviting me to fire on him again. I obliged and fired 5 rounds into him, but all he did was allow them to connect as he laughed. I ran up to him, but he grabbed me by the throat before I could do anything. He pulled me close to his face, and I could see every horrifying feature. Not only did he have demon-like eyes, but his face was covered in disgusting, pulsating veins. In his mouth were 2 sharp fangs and a long, slimy tongue, which rubbed against my face, as if tasting me before taking his first bite. I lifted my gun to the arm that had a hold of me and fired twice. He growled in pain as he released me, and I connected the butt of my gun to his face. Repeatedly, he fell to the floor and I mounted him, smashing his face more and more, harder and faster. I could feel the blood gush and spray all over as the bones in his skull crack and collapse. By the time I was done, there was nothing but smashed bone, brains, and blood. I panted as I stood back up and limped over to Sarah, who was now fully unconscious. I shook her and she finally opened her eyes, looking into mine with fear and confusion. "Sarah," I said, feeling relieved that she was all right. I held her close and we laid there until I looked over to where the body of the stranger should have been. He was gone, and panic arose once again, and we both stood up quickly. I turned to face Sarah and screamed when I saw him standing behind her, still in the process of regenerating his face. Before I had a chance to react, he sunk his fangs deep into Sarah's neck. She screamed in pain as I screamed in rage, hitting the monster in the skull once again with my gun. I felt bone crack again as he released her. Again, I mounted him and went to work, growing exhausted the longer it went. I knew this wouldn't last, as he would surely regenerate again. It soon became obvious what exactly I was dealing with. He had put Sarah into a trance, merely by looking at her, even looking through a peephole. It wasn't until he invited him inside that he actually got in. He had glowing red eyes and fangs, and he bit Sarah in the neck. He's a goddamn vampire, I thought to myself, while he was down. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed an old wooden broom. I broke it in half and ran back to the body, where I rammed it as hard as I could directly into his heart. The body began to convulse and flail its arms and legs all over. Suddenly it stopped and went completely limp, before melting away into deep red blood and other disgusting fluids. After catching my breath, I slowly turned my attention to Sarah. She sat there in the darkness, legs folded and upper torso fully erect. "Honey," I said, nervously approaching her. In the darkness, I could only see her silhouette until her eyes began to slowly glow red. There was only one thing I could think of to do. I loved my wife. I would do anything for her. Even if that meant chaining her up in the basement, feeding her a pint of my own blood, to ensure her survival. Despite the horror of the situation, my resolve was clear. I couldn't lose her, not to this darkness that had invaded our lives. So, I did what I had to do. I prepared the basement, making it as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. I included a bed, some books, and ensured there was enough light. Every day I would go down, spend time with her, talk to her about my day, hoping for any sign of the woman I loved to return to me. But with each visit, the reality of our situation weighed heavily on me. Her eyes, once full of warmth and love, now glowed with a predatory light. Yet, in rare moments, I thought I could see a glimmer of her former self. I held on to those moments, clinging to the hope that one day we could find a cure, a way to reverse what had been done. Research became my refuge, delving into ancient texts and seeking out experts in the supernatural, all in the quest to save Sarah. Despite the challenges, my love for her never wavered. I was determined to keep her safe, to protect her from the world, perhaps more importantly, to protect the world from her. That night in the cabin taught me that solitude might hide more than just peace and quiet, and that some places carry secrets we might never want to uncover. But it also taught me the depth of my love, a love that would endure even in the face of the unthinkable. Because when it comes to the ones we love, we are capable of doing anything. I live in a small town. So small that everyone knows each other and there's absolutely nothing to do. In my early 20s, my BF, back then, 23M, and I, back then, 21F, would ride back roads and sometimes this old dirt road that lead up a mountain called Treat Mountain. We did often on weekends and the rides were mostly nice. We just went to the gas station, grabbed a Red Bull and a quick snack, a pack of cigarettes while filling up the tank. We would just ride until we got tired. We talked and listened to music the entire time. It was really a really peaceful date, one of our favorites to go on. Just a note, Treat Mountain was once famous for being really rough. A bunch of crackheads and hillbillies lived there as well as a large dog fighting ring. It's been shut down now though. My BF lived at the base of that mountain, so he knew it well. As scary as it was really pretty to drive up on a clear night because you could see millions of stars. I love stars. Treat Mountain was where I saw my very first shooting star, so it was always kind of magical to me. My boyfriend was a big dude who always carried a gun and a rifle in the truck with him, so I never really felt unsafe while riding with him either. So, of course, we would often ride Treat Mountain on the weekends. One night, I remember it was a full moon and the sky was clear. As you can imagine, it was beautiful. The perfect night to ride up the mountain and stargaze. My BF had bought me a telescope extension for my phone camera, and I couldn't wait to try it out. About an hour into our ride, we came up on about the third clearing. Just nothing but flat dirt on either side of us. The dirt ride divided into 3 paths, and we always took the path to the right. But that particular night, we took the path in the center because that's the path that leads to the top of the mountain, and that's where you got the best view of the stars. We've only taken the center path a few times, because it's really narrow and creepy and I really didn't like it. But it was worth it for the clear and pretty nights. I usually just closed my hands and held my boyfriend's hand. That night, I kept my eyes open. After about 10 minutes of driving, we stop. It was dead. Fucking silent. Not even a fucking cricket was chirping as they usually do. We both got a sinking feeling in our gut, but we brushed it off and kept going. A couple minutes later, we stop again. A white circle with an upside-down star had been spray painted on the ground. The dog was tied up and in the center of it, screaming for his life through his duct-taped muzzle. He was covered in a strange black sludge that I assume was blood. "Stay in the truck and lock your door." My BF handed me a spare 9mm that he kept in the center console as he grabbed his 45mm from under his seat. He got out of the truck with his gun cocked and pocket knife out. I watched in terror as my BF pulled the duct tape off of the dog's muzzle. Thankfully, the dog had wiggled it loose enough for my BF to just slip him right of it and begin to cut the rope that bounding the dog's paws. My BF always kept his knives nice and sharp, so thankfully that didn't take long either. It took about 3 minutes total for my BF to free the dog and run back to the truck. He tried to catch the dog and take it down the mountain with us. The poor thing sped off in the woods. After my BF got back in the truck, he slammed his truck door and locked it. He took my gun from me, locking it back in the center console, but he kept his in reach, just in case. "We're getting the hell out of here," he said to me as he started to put the truck in reverse. I screamed as I couldn't help but stare out of the windshield. A large group. I really didn't count them, but there were too many for my liking. Of cloaked, yes, cloaked individuals came walking out of the woods and into the circle. One of them was holding a large knife. Let's call it a dagger, because that's what it looked like, and it was huge. And another was holding a walkie-talkie and began talking into it. They didn't follow us, but they stared as my BF put the truck in reverse and drove away. It was the fastest I had ever seen someone drive in reverse. We make it halfway back to the clearing where the 3 paths begin, and we see more of them. Another one holding a walkie-talkie and 2 hold canes. One started running for us, but he backed off when he realized my BF did not give a shit if he ran him over or not. Once the guy made it out of the way of the truck, he started picking up rocks and throwing them at us. One rock even made a small crack in my BF's windshield. It's still there to this day, 7 years later. We finally made it to the clearing where my BF could turn around, slung us around, and drive the hell off the mountain. We never saw another cloaked individual again, and none of them looked familiar. To this day, neither of us have ever been back on that mountain. We've told a few people this story, and a couple people have reported similar incidents, but never one as intense as ours. We never saw the dog again, but I hope he got away. I hate driving back roads now, especially at night. I remember it so well, like it was yesterday and not 10 years ago. I wish I never went there, and I never will go back. Me and my friend used to go to the forest a lot. It was pretty big, but the area we hung out at was right next to our town, and was generally pretty quiet, so we hung there a lot. We hadn't gone there for maybe a month or so, which was pretty weird for us, so we decided to go for a picnic with some of the food we had at the house. I remember first walking into there and how quiet it was, which was normal. Since only dog walkers were ever there, it was usually quiet, so we just walked around down to the closer lake, which was nothing pretty. Just a small lake in the middle of some grass, which wasn't comfy, so we kept walking down to a secluded area, which had a small tree and a lot of area, so we sat down and ate. Played around before it started to get more serious. The first thing I remember is hearing some voices not close, but I could tell they were male. They kept getting further away, so I thought nothing of it. I mean, it was a big forest, of course. People would be there. So we finished with the food. I mean, she did anyways. We packed up and walked down to another lake before an overwhelming stench hit me for a second. It smelled like death. That smells so bad. What is it? I said something like that. She shrugged, telling me she smelt nothing, so I let it go, thinking it could have been maybe a dead bird nearby that I was too close to. We walked for a couple more minutes till we got to another area. It was a gorgeous place with tall trees surrounding it, so I took a picture. My friend would jump in front of the camera, smiling like a crazy woman, before running down the path once again as I ran behind, before slowing down. I felt scared for some reason. I never do, really. I grew up with a tough family at times, and I've never gotten scared until that moment when it felt off. I called for her back, saying she shouldn't run off. "Don't be so paranoid," she'd yell as she would turn to look over. I saw a bike nearby. It was weird as it looked new and like one of a child's teen's bike, which was weird since most people keep stuff near to them all the time. Especially bikes, since they're known to be stolen a lot. I thought I saw a hat next to it and went to tell my friend. She went to take a closer look before calling out, "It's just a part of a rope." Strange. It was the part of a rope where it would start, is what I can describe it as. I thought maybe those people I heard before were playing a game with it, yet I still felt a weird feeling. I said we should go as I didn't want anything to happen to us, so I started walking to a clearing which headed to a road, but for some reason she didn't follow. I saw her face morph into one with such terror as she held her nose. I found this weird as she was known to be someone who was never scared until I heard a noise like a tree snap and a thump like something hit the ground, so I looked over, walking closer, until a familiar smell of like rotting corpse hit my nose, and then I instantly gagged before she pointed towards some trees. I saw a ladder on the floor, and half a rope attached to the tree. I wondered why it was broken until I looked down. It was a guy laying there, half the rope attached to his neck, and another two guys next to the tree who looked shocked as well. I heard one say something about along the lines of, "It was a dare, I didn't think he would do it," and the other snapped back, "We can't tell anyone. We'd be murderers." I stepped back, grabbing onto my friend. These guys looked maybe 15, 16. Me and my friend were both 12 and 13-year-old girls, and both thin. No way would we be able to fight against them if they saw us, so we slowly started walking before we bolted onto the road. I remember seeing how shocked she looked. I still didn't believe what happened. No way that was real. I mean, I knew something was off, but I didn't think we would see that. We promised never to mention it to anyone else, and that's what we did. We spent the rest of the walk in silence, looking back every so often. I remember going home and laying in bed, wondering when someone would find that guy's body. 2 days later, it took. I was sitting down eating some food when my mom came in, saying I shouldn't go to the forest because of the suicide that happened. I froze. Who was it? I'd ask. Some guy that went to the school close to me. There was a picture of him with him on a bike, and I instantly remembered it was the one from the forest as well. Then another with two of his friends. I nearly threw up recognizing them from that day. Been 10 years since I still can smell that terrible smell and hear the noise when he hit the floor. My friend committed 9 years ago. I've been by myself, I haven't told anyone. I won't ever. I sometimes see pictures of them. They look happy with their wife and kids. I'm not happy after that. I still can't forget that day. I don't know how they have. This happened like 15 years ago. It was school holidays and my friend, we'll call her Sarah, and I were extremely bored and just wanted to chill. This was summertime. We lived in a small town called New Braunfels in Texas. Everything kind of spread out. Anyways, it was around midnight and we didn't know where to go. So we just decided to go to the park. It's a little big. We were there for an hour or so. Nothing unusual. Until we both saw someone or something crouched on a table. First off, a little weird someone else being in the same park at this time. But what's creepy AF is that this person was crouching on top of a fucking table. He wasn't even sitting on the bench. What really fucked me up was because I didn't look away. I kept looking closer. I noticed that there were wings. The body was completely human, but had fucking wings. The part that I'll never forget. All of a sudden, the most blood-curdling scream, like a woman being stabbed to death. But it sounded like a woman, but unhuman at the same time. Like a scream that a normal person doesn't do. But A scream animals can't even make. Almost like those screams in a movie that a demon or something makes. And it just stands up. This fucker has to be 8 feet tall. Minimum. We both ran as fast as we could. Have you ever ran to your lungs' max capacity? I ran until I had no air left in my lungs and then kept running until I had to slow down because I was coughing too much. We knocked on PPL's doors and kept getting threatened that they have guns and will shoot if we don't leave. We were literally locked outside with this thing. I kept looking into the sky because this reminded me of Jeepers Creepers, the movie. After maybe 20 men, the police show up and, of course, think we're on drugs. Wanted to let us go. I walked the rest because I lived a few blocks away. The police drove my friend home. There was a white cop and a Mexican cop. When the Mexican cop heard the story, he pretended like it's just made up. But the look on his face said he knows something about this thing that nobody knows. I have PTSD now and hate going outside alone at night, especially near parks or the woods. Weird PPL don't really scare cops. Animals don't really scare cops. You know, it was something much worse if a cop lies and can't keep a straight face because of fear. Like I said, it's a story that happened, and I remember clear as day. But a story nobody believes. Tried making it as short as possible. I'm being watched by a woman from the other side of the road every day. Now I know who she is. A few years have passed since I moved out of my parents' house to stand on my own 2 feet. While most things were difficult to manage at the beginning of my independent life, I now do them in my sleep. A daily, weekly, even yearly routine that has always worked, and there's not much that can break it. Except when you realize sooner or later that the perfect life you've supposedly built isn't so perfect after all. For example, when you realize that the monthly costs are too high to put any significant money aside, and it will probably be difficult to pay off your student loan. And when the tax authorities come knocking at your door for a tax audit, you really realize what it means to be an adult. Some time ago, I was in a terrible crisis because I had massive debts that I couldn't pay, and my mother also died. And as I was an only child and my father died when I was a child, my mother was the last person I could count on. It was around that time that I started to see her. The woman on the side of the road. I didn't notice her at first, but the more often she appeared, the more often I noticed her. At the time, I thought she was just a simple middle-aged woman waiting for her bus. But the more often I saw her, the more it increased. In the beginning, I saw her maybe once a month, then eventually twice, then eventually several times a week, and eventually every day. She always looked at me. She had long brown hair and a few strands of gray. Otherwise, she was quite pretty. She wore a white short-sleeved top with a black skirt that went down to her feet. She also wore a bracelet. Her face was emotionless, and no one who walked past her seemed to interact with her. A month before the event, I started seeing her even at night. And during the night, she stood even closer to my house. She was not on the opposite side of the street, but on mine, staring at the house. When this was the case, some strange things often happened. I heard someone knocking on the door, but I didn't have the courage to open it because I assumed the woman was stalking me. Then I heard doors and even windows opening and closing. I tried to speak to her a few times, but every time I stepped out of the house, she was gone. It was almost as if she had vanished into thin air. 2 weeks before the event, I saw her everywhere. At home, at work, on the way home, in my favorite cafe, everywhere. I only saw her in the corner of my eye. But the really scary thing happened the night before the event. I woke up in the middle of the night because I saw her in my dreams. She ran up to me and asked me for help. But she didn't explain what she wanted me to help her with. She just repeated it until I woke up. A shiver ran down my spine because my door was ajar, and I saw her peeking through the slit. I wanted to scream at her to leave me alone, but I couldn't get a sound out. She turned around and disappeared into the darkness. I contacted the police, but when they searched my house, they found no one. There was no sign of a break-in either. I worked at a tech company as a computer scientist, and even though I was earning well, I could only just cover my costs. And then there were still the back payments to the tax office. I couldn't even afford a car, so I had to walk. I remained optimistic that my situation would change at some point. But most of all, I hoped I wouldn't see the woman again. And then came the event that changed my life. That evening I was walking home from work. It was a Friday, so it was the weekend, and I don't know why, but something made me take a detour through a forest. The forest atmosphere was incredibly calming. For the first time, I was able to really reflect. I came to the conclusion that I imagined the older woman as a reaction to my mother's death. That I didn't want to be alone and longed for a mother figure to lean on. I lay down in the grass and closed my eyes. I was about to sink into the realm of dreams in the middle of the forest when I was suddenly awakened by a loud scream. I jumped up and looked around. I heard a woman screaming from a distance. I don't know why I didn't call the police right away, but I ran in the direction of the noise. I was afraid that someone was in danger, that I had to help. And then I saw them. Two older, broad men who had gagged and tied up a young woman. They pressed their hands over the woman's mouth as she screamed in panic for help, while they tried to tape it shut with duct tape. As they were still busy with the woman and were inattentive, I was able to pick up a thick stick nearby and sneak up on them. I reached out and pulled the stick over the head of one of them. He fell unconscious, and the other first wondered whether he should attack me, but then took flight. The woman cried bitterly, and I freed her. Then I called the police. In the meantime, I stayed with the crying and traumatized woman and assured her that everything was fine and that nothing would happen to her. The man who had been knocked unconscious was arrested immediately, and his partner was arrested as well. The two were wanted criminals who had already taken the life of a middle-aged woman after torturing and raping her. When an ambulance arrived alongside the police, the woman was given medical treatment while the policemen questioned me. They told me that they needed a witness statement from me and took me to the police station. Afterwards, I visited the woman in hospital, and she thanked me from the bottom of her heart. She explained that she was afraid at that moment she would share the fate of her mother, who was also murdered. But now she is happy that she is well. We talked for a while and got to know each other a little, and it got late. I explained to her that I had to go now, but that we would surely see each other again. She thanked me again and said goodbye. When I stepped outside, I saw her again. The woman. She was standing on the other side of the street again. Although it was raining, I could clearly see that she was smiling at me. And then she made a sign for me to follow her. I took this as a chance to find out what she wanted from me. Also because I hoped to finally have my peace. I followed her. While I did so, she always kept eye contact, even if that meant walking backwards. I was a bit confused, but whenever I called out to her where she wanted me to go, she just kept quiet and made the gesture again that I should follow her. She eventually led me to the town cemetery and there to the grave of a Ruby Miller. When I finally caught up with her, she had her back turned to me and was staring at the headstone. She turned and looked me in the eye, and I could see that she had tears in her eyes. She began to speak. I suppose you're wondering who I am and why I was watching you. After everything that happened, you deserve an answer. The girl you saved today, she's my daughter. I looked at her in disbelief and replied, "What? That's a very macabre joke, isn't it? She told me her mother is dead." "She is," she replied, and showed me the gravestone. "My name is Ruby Miller. The men who were arrested today abused and killed me some time ago. They took my daughter's photo from my wallet and told me before they killed me that they would find my daughter and do the same to her." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened carefully. In the afterlife, I was looking for a way to help my daughter. Souls are no longer bound by time after death. This allowed me to find a solution in different timelines to save my daughter. In every timeline in which my daughter survived, you were the one who saved her. So I returned to my timeline, tracked you down and led you into the forest. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope you know that you are her guardian angel. Finally, I can rest in peace now that I know my daughter is safe. Suddenly, she pulled a ring she wore on her right hand off her finger. I want you to have this. This is my wedding ring. A gift from my husband. We were wealthy. This is a 5-carat diamond ring. It was buried with me, but I don't think I have any use for it anymore. But for you, it can be a key out of your difficult situation. She handed me the ring and came up to me for a hug. I closed my eyes for just a moment, and when I opened them again, she was gone. The only thing I heard was the rain pattering on the headstones and the grass. I stood in front of the headstone for a few more minutes. I still had the ring in my hand. It was hard to process that moment. I sold the ring for a good price and was finally able to get rid of a significant amount of my debt. Samantha, the woman I saved, became a friend of mine shortly after. But I never told her what happened at the cemetery, or what happened before that fateful day. If I had told her I had met her mother, she would never have believed me. Ruby, however, never showed up again. I still cry when I think about it. Thank you, Ruby. Sincerely.